Hey everyone, George here. Welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to talk about a subject that's not a subject that we cover enough here, and that is losing fish through jumping out of your tank. And I know that's kind of a weird subject to cover, but it's one of those things that I really have found since we've been in this quarantine. As I'm cleaning tanks and I'm not paying attention, I have lost a couple of fish. Now, I haven't lost a dramatic amount of fish, but I know that it's because I've walked away when I'm filling the tanks and that sort of thing. But we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about some of the things that we can do to prevent that from happening. And we're going to get to that in just a few minutes here. Hey everyone, George here. Welcome back to the channel. So today what we're going to talk about is a subject that is just kind of cropped up on me recently, and I thought I'd share it with you. This is about not paying attention to when you're doing water changes and losing fish. And I know this isn't a subject that a lot of people talk about, and I know that it's not something that probably happens very often, and it really never happened to me until just recently. During this lockdown, of course, I've had more time to maintain my tanks, and I've had more time to spend on rescaping some things, and just more time with the tops off the tank and not paying attention. And this is so easily to get distracted and not understand that these fish do jump. And it can be just as simple as you're startling them by pouring water into the tank, doing a water change, moving some rocks around and whatever without taking the fish out. And there are just certain species out there, and particularly the species that you least expect to jump are the jumpers. And I'm going to just tell you a couple of different ones. I had a peacock gudgeon that got out of the tank, and I was very fortunate that I heard a splashing sound, and I looked around for less than 10-15 seconds, and I found him on the floor. And I do keep a little card in my pocket whenever I am, and this is something you want to really think about, because these fish are very hard to pick up off a floor that's not carpeted. If it's a hardwood floor or it's a tiled floor or something like that, they're very hard to pick up. So anyways, I keep a card in my pocket, and I was able to scoop this fish up and get it back into the tank, and he was just fine. But this can happen, and this happened to me yesterday again. It was a rainbow peacock, or not peacock, a rainbow scissor rainbow fish of the dwarf species, and I was doing about a 50% water change, and I noticed this morning when I went in there that the female was missing. Now, there's two things that can happen here. This can happen while you're doing these water changes. It can happen while you are just turned away for a second. That's all it takes. And it's, if you've got a fish tank that's a community tank that's really full, you're not going to notice it. You're just not going to notice it until you go to look for your fish, and you start looking at your tank really closely the next day or something like that. Then you're going to see that you're missing a fish, and you're going to find that fish behind a cabinet or someplace on the floor that's obviously didn't survive. And I want to talk about this a little bit on what you can do, some of the preventative things that you can do. The first thing I recommend is, if you're doing a water change, a lot of people talk about having open top tanks. I don't believe that people, while they're filming, they may have open top tanks in that sense, but they do not have open top tanks all the time. And if they do, they're losing fish, and there's just no way around that. Fish jump, and they do this because of it's just their natural instincts. If you've ever been out on a lake or a river or whatever, fish jump. They do it, and they do it for reasons that we don't have any idea, because there's no studies out there that tell you exactly why they do it. It can be for many reasons. What I would tell you is, make sure that every time you walk away to get more water or to whatever you happen to be doing to that tank, remind yourself to put the lid back on, because if you take that lid off and you leave it off, you are just asking for trouble, and it's going to happen to you sooner or later. Now, all of these tanks have lids on them, as you can see here. This one here is a makeshift because it didn't come with one. This is just a piece of plexiglass. You can buy this anywhere at a hardware store or whatever. They will even cut it for you. But just setting it on top. The problem with plexiglass is you can get real glass if you can. If you can find real glass there, that's the better option. Except for the seal on it, it's a little bit more intense, and you might get a little more condensation, a little more heat in there. But plexiglass is a great option. The only problem with plexiglass is every 2 or 3 days it starts to warp a little bit from the heat of the tank, and then you do have to flip it over, wipe it off real good, flip it over and set it back on there. It's not a major inconvenience, but it is something that you do have to remember if you are using plexiglass, that it is going to have a little bit of warpage to it over a day or two, sometimes 3 days. Just depends on how big the piece is. If it's a really small piece, it won't warp at all. If you've got a tank about this size, or any of the other ones that I have in the room here that are nano tanks, this is the biggest tank that I have in the room. And I would just say that if the aquarium that you have does not come with a top, this is a great option for that. Or if you can get a piece of cut glass, most hardware stores will have cut glass or fiberglass, or not fiberglass, but plexiglass, and you can use either one of those. They're both great options, and they will cut them exactly to the size and the measurement of your tank. And this is a real easy way to make sure that you don't lose fish. Now, the one thing, even if you have a top, if you take that top off to do some work or whatever and you're not paying attention, and a fish jumps out, as soon as you turn around or whatever and you don't see it, you're not going to notice that for a while, and you're going to lose that fish. So make sure before you turn around or whatever, you keep that top close by and you put it back on and set it on the top before you go on to do any other maintenance to that tank. While you're maintaining the tank, I've seen fish jump while I'm actually working in a tank. And of course you can see that happen, and you can get those fish picked back up and get back into the tank really quickly without any damage whatsoever. But this is a subject that I thought I would talk about because I think it's really important that we understand that fish jump, and you're going to lose them if you're not paying attention. So it's a short video today, and it's something I've been meaning to talk about for a while, but I thought it was really important that I get that message out to people, because there are newbie people out here in this hobby that don't know anything about this and don't pay attention to it, and they're wondering, where'd my fish go? I guarantee you look behind a cabinet, you look behind your fish tank, you look behind someplace, you're going to find that fish. And unfortunately, it's going to be too late, because it does not take long for these fish to expire after they've jumped out of a tank. Now, I did have a betta. I'll tell you a quick story. I did have a betta fish that did this, and it was about, I would say, 15 minutes before I noticed that this betta fish had jumped out. And this was in a tank early on in my days in the hobby, and I found him. I got him back in the tank, and he lived about 5 more years. So I was just amazed that he lasted 15 minutes out of that tank. So they're one of the few fish that have that little bladder thing there, and that breathing apparatus that helps them to be able to breathe air when they're not in water. The biggest problem you have with any fish is they're going to dry out. Their skin's going to dry out, their scales are going to dry out, whatever kind of fish it happens to be. And then that's where you run into a problem, and this is where even if you do catch them, I'm telling you, the critical zone is somewhere between about 10 to 30 seconds. And if you don't get that fish back in that water by then, you're probably not going to be able to save it. Anyways, George here with The Art of Water. Please hit like, subscribe, and comment. Also hit the bell up here. And I appreciate your time, and thank you for listening to me today. I thought this was a great subject to talk about, even though I didn't really have a great video to put together today because I haven't been doing much here lately. But I thought this was really important, and I wanted to get that out there because it is a subject that I've had several friends talk about over the last couple of weeks since we've been more at home, and I just thought, you know, let's make a video about it. Let's talk about this subject and get people to be paying a little bit more attention. Now, most aquariums, like I said, do come with tops on them. If they do not, then go get yourself a piece of glass or a piece of plexiglass, and you can solve that problem real easy. Anyways, George here with The Art of Water. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again real soon.